All right. Welcome back, everyone. Today, or in this video, we're looking at Module 6, which is Genetics, Evolutionary Psychology, and Behavior. Um, so this is a really short PowerPoint for a really complex subject. You can literally get a degree in this, and like master's degree and doctorate. Um, so yeah, we're barely scratching the surface, barely, but it's enough for this class basically. We'll also dive back into this when we get to the senses and some different areas in here. But this is kind of your first glimpse of genetics and all of that, and how that affects us. So when we talk about nature versus nurture, this is what we're talking about. Nature being the genetics, nurture being the environment in which we are raised. As always, make sure that you check in and do the little quiz on this with the 4 random facts. And yeah, PowerPoint, it's in D2L, download it, print it off, just look at it through there, pull it up on another tab or whatever, and we'll go from there. All right. Since this is a short one, we're actually going to give you the first random fact right away. So the average American child receives $3.70 per tooth that falls out. That's the average when you get the kid that gets a dime and you get the kid that gets a $10 bill. It averages out to $3.70 per tooth. There you go. All right. First random fact. There you go. Let's get rolling. Slide 2, behavior genetics, predicting individual differences, part 1. So how does our heredity interact with our experiences to create both our universal human nature and our individual and social diversity? And then here's going to be some terms to be looking at and learning. We have an image here of basically the cells. So if you look on page 70, you will see this image that I'm looking at now on the PowerPoint, just in case you don't have that pulled up. But yeah, so here's some terms we're going to learn. Environment. An environment is every non-genetic influence from prenatal nutrition to the people and things around us. So it can be anything from like how healthy your mom was, if there was any issues there, literally from the moment you're little as I got, little, single cell, you got 23 chromosomes from your dad and 23 chromosomes from your mom, couldn't come together, and it's your DNA. Anything that is not in that DNA, essentially, those chromosomes, by its nature, is environment. Okay. So a lot of times we refer to environment like the physical environment that you grow up in, right? Like what kind of parenting style were you raised in, or what was your culture, or like what kind of foods did you eat, and things like that. But it also has to do with like, what was the air quality that you're breathing, and or what was your mom eating when she was pregnant with you? Like was she eating good healthy foods? Was she eating a bunch of junk? Was she like hardcore smoking and doing drugs and stuff? All of those things are going to be affecting the environment upon which your genes then are influenced. Okay, so that's environment. Heredity is the genetic transfer of characteristics from parents to offspring. This is why you somehow look like your mom and dad, right? To some extent, at least. So yeah, that's essentially it. And it's also going to be things like the tendency towards blue eyes versus brown eyes, hair color, height, weight, metabolism, all those kinds of things basically are going to be hereditary. It can also be things like certain issues, certain kinds of arthritis or other. I'm missing words today. Anyway, there's going to be like your chances of getting cancer, all those kind of things can also be inherited, basically heretical. No, anyway, okay, sorry. So yeah, heredity. Behavior genetics is a study of the relative power and limits of genetic and environmental influences on behavior. So in other words, how much of you and how you act is in your genes, and how much of it has been trained into you, right? Are you an introvert that likes to spend a ton of time alone and very little, like if you get overwhelmed quickly with lots of stimulus? Or are you an extrovert who likes lots of people around you all the time, as much energy as possible in your environment? Is that because you were trained to do that, or is that because you were genetically inclined to do that? Okay. Now in that case, that typically is genetically inclined. They've actually found a lot of personality traits. When you look at the big 5 personality types or areas, a lot of them are actually inherited from your parents. And so it's going to be a genetic, if you come from a family of introverts, you're going to more than likely be an introvert. Not a guarantee, but there's a higher chance. Okay. Let's see. Chromosomes, thread-like structures made of DNA molecules that contain the genes. So each of us have, and we're going to look at DNA here in just a second, and genes, so I'm going to hold off on that. So there you go. The chromosome is the little, you have 23 pairings for a total of 46 chromosomes, usually. There are sometimes, about if I remember right, 1 in 200 people will have either 45 or 47 or more. And typically that's where you get some kind of a syndrome. One of the most famous syndromes being like Down syndrome. But there's a whole bunch of other ones that are involved with the number of chromosomes that are present. The older the parents get, the older the people who are going to have the child get, both male and female, the higher the chances of having these little hiccups basically in the chromosome count. But typically you have 23 from mom and 23 from dad. The 23 from dad are in the little sperm, and they come up and connect to the ovum, the egg, from the mom. And when one of them finally breaks through the little shell, you get a sulfur spark and brand new DNA, brand new cell formed at that point. Okay. DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acid. There we go. That's the best I'm going to do at that. It's a complex molecule containing the genetic information that makes up the chromosomes. Essentially, this is it's a combination of 4 different proteins that, depending on which combination, depending on what pattern they're in, make you. Okay. As far as DNA goes, we share the same DNA with every other living human being on the planet, and technically every dead human being on the planet. 99.8% of our DNA is identical. So that 0.2%. So you take any random person on the planet from any age within the last 100,000 years or whatever, and you will be within 0.2% identical DNA. Okay, that 0.2% makes all the differences in all the humans on the planet. Pretty crazy. It's also we share approximately 90% of the same DNA with every mammal on the planet. So you take a mouse or a blue whale and us, and we have 90% of the identical DNA. I believe it's 68 or 72%. I don't remember which exactly, that we share in common of DNA with a banana. So that's the difference between you and a banana. There you go. Okay, genes, biochemical units of heredity that make up the chromosomes, segments of DNA capable of synthesizing proteins. So these are going to be, again, these are all the little bits, basically. Okay. We have approximately 20 to 23,000 genes that are passed within the chromosomes. We don't know the exact number, and it probably differs a little bit from individual to individual, but that's approximately the number, 20 to 23,000, give or take. And all those genes are essentially on and off switches, so depending on which ones are turned on and which ones are turned off, make you versus a banana or sea slime or something, okay? So yeah, you can thank your parents for being human instead of a banana. Genome is a complete instructions for making an organism consisting of all the genetic material in that organism's chromosomes. This is the blueprint that makes whatever that organism to become the organism that it should become, right? We as humans don't give birth to a puppy or a bird or a banana, right? That just doesn't happen. So the genome is humans give birth to humans, bananas give birth to bananas, and so on and so forth. Okay. But it's the thing that makes you. All right, slide 3. Behavior genetics predicting individual differeres, part 2. Twins and adoption studies. So twins are kind of an interesting thing for psychologists. It offers a lot of opportunities. There's actually more than 2, but there's 2 common types of twins. There's monozygotic and dizygotic. Monozygotic basically are 2 people that come from the same zygote, okay? So you have one ovum, one egg, one sperm penetrates it, and you have one cell. Within a couple hours, that one cell turns to 2 cells, and then 2 cells to 4, and then 4 to 8, and then 8 to 16, and then 16 to 32, and then 32 to 64, and then 64 to 128, and so on and so forth, okay? I could keep going, but I'm not going to. Typically, somewhere in that early stages of the cells splitting and multiplying. Instead of it just splitting and staying within the same package, it breaks apart. So you go from 1 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 8, let's say, and then instead of going 8 to 16, you go 8 and have a complete split, and you have 2 sets of 8. Okay, that's an identical twin, a monozygotic twin. They come from exactly the same egg and exactly the same sperm. They are 100% genetically identical. If they both live and grow up and one commits a murder and they have DNA evidence, they don't know which of those twins did the murder from the DNA evidence. Okay. Now, they might not look identical because of the fact that there are the environmental factors, right? If you have two twins and one twin eats lots of healthy foods and the other twin eats a bunch of cupcakes, and that's all they live on, they're going to look different, right? But the genetics are the same, and that's actually where they come in interesting in psychology. We're going to look at that in just a second. Fraternal or dizygotic twins are basically you have two little ovum or two separate eggs that are each fertilized by two separate sperm at this roughly the same time, within a short amount of time from each other. So they're genetically, the closest they can be genetically is just the same as any siblings. Okay. So it give or take, it's about the same. Interesting fact, if a woman sleeps with two separate men at approximately the same time, with like in a day of each other, she potentially could have fraternal twins with different fathers. One ovum gets fertilized by one of the father's sperms, and the other ovum gets fertilized by the other father's sperm. So you could actually have two half siblings in the womb at the same time. Okay, so identical twins. We're going to go back to that because honestly, fraternal twins, I mean, they offer some interesting information, but the only thing that's different from them and any other siblings is just that they happen to be in the womb at the same time. The identical twins offer us a real opportunity because we have two people who essentially have exactly the same DNA, but they experience the environment differerly, right? Even if they were raised in the same family, they're going to have some differences in how they have interacted with the environment, from what they're exposed to the kind of people, how they treat them. All those kinds of things can be different. So, a really interesting area is where we have separated twins, where they can then figure out where the similarities are. So there's been several actually famous cases where people were separated at birth as identical twins, raised in separate households, and a lot of times in completely separate areas of the country. 30, 40, 50 years down the road, they discover that they had a twin. They find each other, and then that offers the psychologist a real significant opportunity to figure out what aspects of us are genetic and what aspects are environmental. And what they found is that there is a absurd amount of similarities between people who are identical twins. There's a famous set of twins. They found each other when they were in their late 50s. And they both had, one was raised in a lower middle class family, one was raised in a pretty upper middle class family. Different areas of the country, but they both had the same interest in cars. They both worked with wood for a career. One was a fine carpenter, and one was built, houses and things like that. Or some of the other things. They both had giant rubber band collections, like these great big giant rubber band balls. They were both married twice, and they both of their wives had the same first names in both the first and second marriage. The third was also divorced and married a third time, so there was kind of a joke between them that got to look out for the brother who hadn't gotten divorced yet on the second time. Look out for a woman named, I don't know, it was like Barbara or something like that. But yeah, there's the statistically their similarities were just off the charts, showing that there was in fact some inclination genetically and not just environmentally. So this is where biological versus adoptive relatives become, or you can also take this into account. What they found is that there's more biological similarity to genetic relatives. So extroversion, agreeableness, like I said, the big five, if you look at the personality types, the big five things, those are much more influenced by your genes than they are influenced by the people who you're around. Your more attitude, values, manners, politics, and faith are more guided by your environment. So if you're raised in a household that's Democrat, there's a decent chance you're going to be Democrat. If you're raised in a household that's Republican, there's a good chance you're going to be Republican. And if you're in a house that's just like It's all garbage. There's a good chance that's how you're going to see it also. So yeah, if that helps. And if you're raised in a Christian family, decent chance you'll be Christian, right? Or at least have those morals and values. Buddhist family, same kind of thing, but Buddhist, you're going to have, atheist, same thing. Okay, doesn't really matter. It's kind of what is mirrored to you, or what is shown to you, that will influence those factors. Okay. Next random fact. Scotland was one of the few countries to hold off being conquered by the first century Roman conquest, as far as the countries that Rome tried to take in first century. Scotland was one of the few that actually wasn't able to be taken. There you go. Go Scotland. Okay. Slide 4. Slide 4, behavior genetics, predicting individual differences. And we have an image here of fraternal versus identical twins. You can also find this on page 71. So gene or environment interaction, right? We are a mixture of nature and nurture. We are nature being our genes, nurture being the environment. We are a strong mixture of those two things combined. So behavioral hallmark of humans is their enormous adaptive capacity. I think we've talked about this somewhat in here already. But we are incredibly flexible with our ability to adapt to environment. We are survivors as a species. So genes and environment interact. So genes are self-regulating. Okay, genes, the things that flip on and flip off and all those things, they just do it on their own. You don't have to think about it, obviously. And they do it, just given the markers that are there, they know what they're supposed to do. Environments can trigger gene activity. So in some cases, some switches that are off might get turned on, or some switches that are on might get turned off, depending on what is available in the environment. This is especially true within the time that the child is in the womb. So there's real key points that there needs to be certain things present and or certain things not present in the womb. And so like good diet and not taking things like smoking cigarettes and drinking alcohol and things like that is extremely important during that time. Genetically influenced traits evoke significant responses in others. So in other words, certain things are going to turn on and turn off, and that's going to cause those responses, right? Just like if you have multiple switches hooked to the same thing, you can turn one off and turn one on, and that's going to affect how that plays out. Same thing here. Experiences create epigenetic marks. So epigenetics is above or in addition to, or epigenetics is another way that people talk about it. So the study of molecular mechanisms by which environments can influence genetic expressions without a DNA change. Your DNA looks exactly the same. Okay, and this is where the epigenetic factor comes in. Your DNA doesn't look any different. Okay. But how much can you tweak it, basically turn on or turn off your DNA with the exact same structure to make the differences in what you potentially are? Okay. And this is so epigenetic molecules that regulate gene expression. This is going to be, again, the thing that causes you to be darker skinned or light skinned, or brown eyes versus blue eyes, dark hair, light hair, curly hair, red hair, whatever. Okay. Tall, short, fat, skinny, all those things are going to be influenced by these epigenetic molecules. So, okay. Next slide, slide 5. Evolutionary psychology, understanding human nature, part 1. So we're kind of shifting gears here. Flipping over to, let me fast forward there. Evolutionary psychology, natural selection and adaptation is Darwin's principles, right? So evolutionary psychology is one of those things when I'm talking about it in here, it's going to look really simple, okay? If you go in and start reading the journals of people who really know what they're talking about, it is a very complicated thing, okay? Same with if you get into like evolutionary biology, things like that. It's not as cut and dry as it looks what you're taught in high school, right? Or even in college, honestly, in undergrad level. It's a very complicated thing as you get deeper into it. So just be aware of that. What I'm telling you technically is true, but it's like it's just not as I'm not giving you the depth that it technically should have, right? Including it also sounds like we really know what we're talking about, but we don't when it comes to this side of things. This is a theory that we've you know, it's the best we've got basically at this point. But anyway, so Darwin's principles, or organisms of varied offspring compete for survival, right? So you take a whole bunch of people and you have them all having kids, and they're all technically competing to see who wins. They might not be competing directly with each other. They might just be competing against the environment, right? So I have light skin, for example. Okay, genetically, my ancestry is Northern European for the most part. So Norway, that's what I've been told at least. Norway, Scotland for sure. Welsh, Irish, a little bit of Portuguese thrown in there, and then also a little bit of Choctaw Indian and Cherokee or Comanche Indian. But for the vast majority of my genetics is from Northern Europe, which is why I'm relatively light-skinned. With that, more than likely the reason that Northern Europeans have lighter skin compared to people, say, from like Africa or even Southern Europe, is that lighter skin is an advantage in that northern climate where the sun is relatively weak, right? So light skin gives me the opportunity, if I get out in the sun, I get my maximum dose of vitamin D very quickly, right? It's actually one of the things that they found for people who have African ancestry, like recent African ancestry, where they're relatively dark skinned. They actually have issues in the northern hemisphere with vitamin D deficiency because their body is made for that hot southern climate, right? That intense sun. You stick me in that environment, I burn to pieces, right? My skin just like that. But they don't get sunburned as easily, and that's an advantage in that case. On the other hand, you move to the north, way up north, where it's, you get 4 hours of sun in the wintertime if you're lucky, and then the sun in the summertime, even though it's more direct, it's still not as intense. Lighter skin is an advantage in that environment. And so people who had kids in that environment, the lighter colored skin would make you have a higher chance of surviving, because essentially in that environment, lighter skin gives you more vitamin D, which makes your immune system work better, which makes you able to overcome diseases more easily, which means you have a higher chance of surviving to the point where you can have offspring, start having kids to get your DNA, your genes into the next generation. Okay. Like I said, this is a dumbed down version, but this is it makes sense. It works though. Okay. So that's why we're talking about this. This is the theory again, why we have all the variances that we do. Let's see. So certain biological and behavioral variations increase organisms' reproductive and survival chances in their particular environment. There you go. And it's also why there can be certain things that you might pass on, such as, let's see what would be a good example. Sickle cell. Sickle cell would be a really good example, right? Sickle cell doesn't cause any issues generally as a kid, so you have a high chance of making it to adulthood. In certain environments, you might actually have a higher chance of making it to adulthood. If you live in Africa, where there is a lot of malaria, sickle cell basically makes you immune to malaria for the most part. It basically can't affect you. So because of that, you actually might have a higher chance of making it into adulthood. But as you age, it causes issues, or it increases chances of a decreased lifespan. But as far as evolutionary speaking, it doesn't matter. All that matters is it gets you to the point where you can have kids more likely, and thus that gene can get passed on more easily. Offspring that survive are more likely to pass their genes to ensuing generations, and so on and so forth. Okay, over generations, hundreds and thousands of generations, you get us. Okay, over time, population characteristics may change. So again, there can be certain elements that are present or not present, or they can shift, which is why you can take a group and move them to one area, and if you give it enough time, things will shift to that environment to make it more, to fit better, essentially. Okay. Okay, I'm just gonna leave it there. There we go. Next random fact. Opposites attract is actually 100% a myth. Psychologically speaking, we aren't actually drawn to people who look very different from us. We actually are looking for people genetically or that look similar to us. So we find ourselves to be the most beautiful creature on the planet, essentially. So we look for somebody who is equally beautiful to us, which is why we typically, like, people who might rate like a 6 on the, like, if people averaged at average scales, they would usually get connected with a 5 to a 7. Okay, somewhere in that range. People who are at the top end at 9s and things like that, they're going to be marrying other 9s or 10s. People who are on the bottom edge, that's where they're going to be marrying, because they're technically looking for people that are genetically compatible. And also personality-wise, we typically look for people who have similar personalities to ourselves. So we're not going to be looking for like that. Like an introvert isn't looking for an extreme extrovert. Typically, it can happen, but it's rare. So there you go. Random fact. Slide 6. Sorry. So the whole thing with that thing too, opposites attract, is false. There we go. So evolutionary psychology, understanding human nature, part 2, slide 6. How did we develop our genetic kinship? So over generations, genes not disposed to mating or nurturing were eliminated from the gene pool. I mentioned before I raised sheep. If you have a ram that doesn't want to do the do, that ram doesn't get its genes in the next generation, right? And so what is potentially there fades with that ram. So that, just an example there. At the same time, again, if you have things that like are diseases or things, or they're genetic mutations that aren't advantageous and or will kill you at a young age, those genes aren't going to get passed on because you die before you have a chance to have offspring. So success enhancing genes were selected, and behavioral tendencies and learning capacities emerged and supported survival, reproduction, and genetic longevity. Essentially, the people who were the most fertile and that had the highest chance of surviving, all of their traits, genetically speaking, are more likely to be passed on to their offspring, right? Because they're more likely to have offspring. So being strong, being, all these different elements in some environments can be good. Other environments, you actually might, like smaller people might have a higher chance of surviving because you don't need as much food, right? I'm 6'10". I need about 3,500 to 4,000 calories a day to maintain weight. I have an exceptionally high metabolism and a very large frame. That combination makes it challenging, right? Strongman competitions, if you ever look at guys that are like the world-class strongmen, they're giant. Like they're my height, but they're like twice my body weight. But they eat on average 10 to 15,000 calories a day. Bodybuilders the same way. Muscle and all that is expensive. And so the genetic potential for that can be good. Strength is good. But if you're in an environment where you can't eat that much, all of a sudden that becomes an issue, right? If I can't get my 3,500 calories a day approximately, all of a sudden I'm in trouble basically, compared to people who may be like 5 foot tall and weigh 100 pounds. They need like 1,500 calories a day to stay healthy, kind of a thing. So, yeah, those are going to be some factors there. Different times, different environments call for different things to be good or bad, right? Last random fact, llamas are oftentimes used as sheep guardians. There you go. They take the place of sheepdogs. They've actually found them to be more effective because one of the problems with sheep guardian dogs is that they sometimes try to eat the sheep. Llamas don't. So that's, there you go. Llamas protect sheep. Slide 7. Evolutionary Psychology, Understanding Human Nature, Part 3. Evolutionary psychology today. So second Darwinian revolution. Basically, Darwin was one of the first influencers of psychology initially with William James. He kind of drew from Darwin's theories to get things going with his social Darwinism and things like that. It kind of faded out, and now it's back essentially. So it's an application of evolutionary principles to psychology. Why do certain personality traits and certain characteristics survive, and why do others not? Right? What traits are make us more likely to survive compared to others? So, still a wide divide between scientific and lay thinking about evolution. Like I said before, it's like pop psychology versus real psychology. Like pop evolution versus real evolution is a very different thing, and typically what we're fed is the pop version of it. So. And that's that. All right. Give you the 4 facts. Yeah. Let me know if you have questions. Message me. Send me a discussion chat or whatever, or send me a message like an email style, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Make sure you wrap up and do the quiz this week for this, and I think that's it. Have a wonderful day. Oh, real quick, I do have some videos in the extra section in this week's section. So if you want to watch some more videos on this, like if this is something that really fascinates you, I've got several videos on genetics and things like that. You don't have to watch them, but they're there if you want to kind of expand your understanding of this. So we'll go from there. But anyway, have a wonderful day. Good luck with everything. I will see you in the next video. Have a great one.